Hello and welcome to the first installment in my Who Would Win in a Fight series. Now I'm going to go straight in. I'm not going to hold anything in the barrel. I should probably hold this for a couple of episodes later, but I'm just going to go shoot straight for the top here. The first installment is going to be Who Would Win in a Fight, the Rocky Saga. And when I mean the Rocky Saga, I'm going to take into account the four main protagonists. I'm going to take into account Rocky. We're going to go with Drago, Clubber Lang, and Apollo Creed. Straight away, I'm not going to count Mason Lion Dixon, and I'm not going to count Tommy Gunn. I know some people out there probably want me to include them, but I just feel that no, they're not worthy of a place at the grand table. Mason Lion Dixon struggled badly, very badly, with an aging Rocky. Now Rocky had been through a fairly good training regime at this stage for that fight, but even though it was only an exhibition, and I know Mason Dixon got injured early on in the fight, no, he struggled very badly with completely over the hill, over the top Rocky. And Tommy Morrison, sorry, I wouldn't even say it's a Freudian slip. Tommy Gunn, well, they're probably the same thing really. No, I don't think he warrants inclusion in this debate either. So I'm not going to be attacking this in just a straight line. Oh, Rocky would beat Clubber and Clubber would beat Drago. Drago would beat Apollo and Apollo would beat Clubber. No, we're just going to bring in a little bit of analytical thought here. I'm going to attack this from the viewpoint of, I'm going to look at those four fighters at their peak and see who would beat who at each respective peak of their careers. Now, the first one we're going to start with here is Drago, Ivan Drago. It's very, very easy to establish his peak in this series. It's got to be the second Rocky fight. We only know of the two fights, the second Rocky fight and the exhibition fight with Apollo Creed. Now, how serious did he train for the exhibition fight? We don't know, but we do know one thing for certain, that there was serious training in more ways than one for the Rocky fight. Now, some people might say, well, he shouldn't even be included because there is the strong intonation that he used steroids. Hey, don't sue me. I'm only going on what I saw in the film, so we can assume that it was steroids that was being injected into him. And also, he underwent a very rigorous training regime. He was going to be fighting on home soil, Christmas Day, so there was going to be no, pardon the pun, punches pulled, so he was taking this fight very, very seriously. Rocky was almost at the peak of his power, so we can assume then Drago was in his best ever condition for that fight. So Drago's peak is the Rocky fight in Rocky 4. Now then, we got to establish Clubber Lang's peak. Now again, we don't really know much of a backstory with Clubber Lang. We don't know the quality of the contenders he was fighting prior to the Rocky fight. So again, we can only judge him on the two fights he had with Rocky. And again, the first one would seem to be his absolute peak. He was going in as a contender, hungry, fresh, strong. We can only assume, again, he underwent a really good training camp to be ready to fight the heavyweight champion. In the second fight, I'm not going to discount. I'm not going to discount the merits of him in the second fight, but we do know that he must have taken the foot off the gas, and he did take Rocky lightly in lieu of what he'd done to him in the first fight. It was only natural, and again, his stamina issues rose for everyone to see in the second Rocky fight. So again, I think we can safely establish that Clubber Lang's peak was the first Rocky fight. Okay, in Rocky 3. Now then, we come to Rocky himself. This is, I mean, there's two strands of Rocky. There's the Rocky we know in Rocky 1 and 2. You know, an average fighter, good chin, average punch, great heart. But then we see the divergent side from Rocky 3 onwards, where, okay, Mickey was a good trainer, but you see the difference in Rocky when Apollo takes him under his wing, and then the Duke does in Rocky 4. So we would, in terms of establishing Rocky's peak, it's going to be either, in my opinion, the second Clubber Lang fight or the Ivan Drago fight. Now again, Rocky's almost two different fighters in both fights. In the first instance, in the second fight with Clubber Lang, he comes in, it's even noted in commentary, he's almost looking like a middleweight. He was built for speed. He was built to try and get Clubber Lang out of there very, very quickly. In the Drago fight, up against a much bigger guy, the training camp, and you can even tell from his physique in that fight against Drago, it was all built around power. They weren't going to, speed wasn't going to be what would beat Drago. They were going to meet power with power. Now, it probably is a matter of personal taste in terms of, well, who do you think is better? The Rocky in Rocky 4 or the Rocky of Rocky 3 against Clubber Lang in the rematch? I'm going to probably going to court a little bit of controversy here. I'm going to go for the Rocky in Rocky 3. It's the only instance where I've ever seen Rocky use really good foot movement. There's head movement, and he actually does something quite controversial for Rocky. He actually blocks some punches quite successfully. So I'm going to plumb here for Rocky in the second Clubber Lang fight. So we've established already, the first three fighters, we've established Ivan Drago's peak is against Rocky. Clubber Lang's peak is in the first fight against Rocky, and Rocky's own peak is in, again, the rematch with Clubber Lang. So that leaves us then with Apollo Creed, first man to ever walk on the moon. So Apollo's peak is going to be very hard to establish, and I actually don't think we're going to be able to establish it. He had been champion for quite a while when he'd fought Rocky. So, and once he lost the title, he never actually fought after that. So we can assume then that the Rocky fights were the end of his career. And whether if he'd have won those, if he'd have fought on, we don't know. So we can only assume with what information we've been given is that Apollo's peak was somewhere maybe just before the Rocky fight, maybe 2 or 3 fights before. I think Apollo knew he was going to be retired anyway, so that's why the chance was given to Rocky in the first place. So we're going to have to assume, we're going to have to work blind with Apollo. We're going to have to just assume that 2 or 3 fights before, he was probably at his peak. Now, there might have been much difference between his peak and when he fought Rocky. Maybe he was marginally faster. His punch resistance was a little bit better. And again, in the Rocky fights, especially in the first fight, there was, he mightn't admit it, but there was some level of complacency by Apollo going into the Rocky fight. So that's it. I think I've got the peaks of each respective fighter right. So I mean, look, that's my choice. I'm going to have to go with something here to try and find an answer to this. So the first contest then I would look at is Clubber Lang and Drago. Both strong guys, both serious contenders. No one really has a speed advantage in this one. In fairness, they're both big, strong punchers. A little bit agricultural and cumbersome in many ways. But what we can say is that Clubber Lang in the rematch with Rocky, again, a much lighter Rocky than that which fought Drago. Clubber Lang was, even though he dished out a lot of his own punishment, Clubber Lang was beaten in 3 rounds, beaten down by cumulative effect of Rocky's punches. Drago, on the other hand, almost went the full distance with a much. Check the tapes. You go on YouTube after this and just look at the difference in Rocky's physique at the start of the Clubber Lang fight and in the start of the Drago fight. Different altogether. Drago went almost the full distance with Rocky, a stronger Rocky. So when you're putting Clubber Lang and Drago head to head, it would just be who would punch the other one into submission. And I would plumb here for Drago. I would think, we know Clubber Lang took the foot off the gas in training before the rematch with Rocky, but his stamina, he was just built for the kill in both fights. He was just, in many ways, just muscle bound. He gassed. If Rocky had survived them all in the first couple of rounds in the first fight, who knows, he might have gassed mid-round anyways. There's a slight little touch of Miguel Cotto in him in terms of, I don't think we can trust Clubber Lang's stamina at all. Drago, on the other hand, went a full 14, 15 rounds war with Rocky. Absolute war. Almost made it to the end. So I would be trusting Drago in terms of a little bit more power maybe. Clubber doesn't have any speed advantage on him. So I would give this one, I would give the nod to this one to Drago. Maybe a mid to late stoppage. That's what I've got him down for. So that's Drago over Clubber Lang. So then we go to Clubber Lang and Apollo. Now again, this may be one of the most intriguing fights of the lot. Both strong guys, slight advantage with speed to, well, probably more than a slight advantage of speed with Apollo Creed. Much better head movement, much better foot movement, skill set far more superior. He was a seasoned veteran, had been at the top, defended the title several times, had loads more experience than Clubber Lang. And we actually don't know, again, said it before, we don't know Clubber Lang's history of opponents. He could have been fighting tomato cans all the way up until he got to fight with Rocky. So again, I would think, based on that, I would think Apollo would win. Again, maybe a late stoppage, maybe a very late stoppage, maybe in the 10th or 11th round. I would think Apollo would probably just edge that. But there would be some scares along the way. Again, Apollo had the tendency, when he wanted to box, he was probably the best boxer, the most skillful boxer of anyone in the series of Rocky films. But he did get prone to getting dragged into brawls when there was no need. I mean, there was no need for him to do what he did in either of the Rocky fights. If he had stayed on his toes, kept on the outside, the history of that film franchise could be very, very different. So I would give that to Apollo. Late stoppage, 10, 11 rounds. Now then we come to Drago and Apollo. Part of me doesn't want to count the exhibition fight. That's all it was. It was an exhibition fight. We know Drago would have been coming into America pumped up. Apollo, probably a little bit of ego. Ultimately, that's what cost him his life. Obviously didn't train as if he was training for a heavyweight title fight. And we all know what happened. But this could be a very simple, Drago beats him, mid to late stoppage. But this is one fight where I think if Apollo was to use the right tactics, again, stay on his feet, slip and move, as he used to always say himself, try and bring the jab into play against Drago, I actually think there would have been a chance for Apollo to win this one on points. Only a little chance though, and he would have to fight the perfect game plan. There'd be no room for mistakes, no room for error at all. So I mean, again, I'm going to have to come down from the fence on this one. My thoughts are either Drago, late stoppage, because again, I'm pitching Drago against Apollo at his best. Apollo's punch resistance in the exhibition bout, obviously by that he was just shock worn. His punch resistance had completely gone. So again, I'm pitching Drago in against Apollo Creed at his absolute peak. And his absolute peak again, maybe a couple of fights before the first Rocky fight. But I would still think Drago would probably just tag him a little bit too late. Maybe again, very late stoppage. Maybe based on Apollo just can't resist having a slugfest when there's absolutely no need for it. So just at the moment, just to recap where we are, I've got Drago beating Clubber Lang. I've got Apollo beating Clubber Lang. So Clubber Lang isn't really coming out, it's all too well. He's, maybe he was a one fight wonder. And when you look back in the first fight of Rocky, the training wasn't what it should have been. He wasn't where he ended up being physically in the third and fourth films. And also, Mickey Dine, his head was just cabbage. So again, Clubber, great performance, very powerful, but really he caught Rocky at the best time. So I've got Clubber losing to both Drago and Apollo. So Clubber, bottom of the list there, and then Drago and Apollo. I'm just going to, again, as I've said, I'm going to edge it towards Drago. So now, I know everyone out there is probably thinking, yeah, but Rocky's the best fighter. Rocky beat them all. And some people might even say, but Clubber's the only guy to beat Rocky of all those fighters. And, there is some merit to that. But Clubber got Rocky at the perfect time. And when Rocky's training was shifted up a gear, new techniques were brought in, all these old habits were forced out of his boxing. When he learned how to block, well then I think we saw really where Clubber stands in the pantheon of the Rocky fight. So lastly then, who really is the best of all those? Everyone's going to plumb for Rocky. But for me there's a slight trick in the tail here. I have Rocky's peak down as the second fight with Clubber Lang in Rocky 3. Now, I actually think that if the Rocky from Rocky 3 was to fight Drago, I think the outcome would potentially be different than the outcome in Rocky 4. I think in Rocky 3, he sacrificed power for just blinding speed. But I don't think that would have been good enough to chop down the tree that was Ivan Drago. Okay, Rocky 4, yeah, that was good enough. He built himself for the kill. But I actually think if Drago was to be standing across the ropes instead of Clubber Lang at the end of Rocky 3, I actually think it may have been, I don't like saying it, I think Rocky might have made his match. But again, Rocky did beat him, but I actually think Drago, underrated, his footwork wasn't the greatest, head movement almost non-existent, but he did have a good jab. He did have the ability to control a fight with the jab. Again, neglected it. Rocky seemed to have this beautiful habit of drawing everyone into a fight. Everyone fought Rocky's fight. Rocky never was manipulated to fight someone else's fight. Everyone always. He's a bit like Floyd Mayweather. You fight the way he wants to fight. He's a street fighter. We all know Rocky's history. Debt collector. But I actually think if the start of the rematch with Clubber Lang, if it was Drago across the ring apron that night, I actually think Drago would have taken Rocky again. Maybe a mid-round stoppage, just pure power. By the time Rocky did get to fight Drago, he knew what was ahead of him. He knew what it took. So again, ultimately, it's the Rocky show. Rocky's the hero, the best one of the whole lot. But if history was retweaked a little bit, I think Drago, again, a moderate skill set, but a good jab and what with his size, I actually think Drago is the one again that has the potential to beat them all. Now, not going to be liked for it, going to be a little bit controversial, but you can leave your comments down below and let me know what you think of my analysis, not really of me. So until next time, maybe in a future video I will do a separate video on who would win in a fight, Tommy Gunn or Mason the Lion Dixon. You know, we'll see. So until then, goodbye.